Okay, welcome everyone. If we could be upstanding. Almighty God, we ask that you be present at this meeting to assist us in our service to the community through local government. We pray that our decisions will be wise and taken with goodwill and clear conscience. Amen. Amen. And item 2, councillor office and officer presence at the meeting. Have that. Apologies and granting of leave of absence. Apologies. Any disclosures of conflict of interest? Item 5, confirmation of minutes. Do we have a recommendation? Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Dickshay.
I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Scales. All in favour? Carried. Petitions and joint letters. Have any? Nothing. Public question time. No questions either. Informal meetings of councillors.
Councillors, I've noted that we do have a slight error on the cover page of Appendix 1, where the meeting on the 12th of November, we do have a conflict of interest disclosed. However, that should read there were no conflicts of interest disclosed at that meeting. We will amend the cover sheet.
Thank you. We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Scales.
Happy to move that the information be noted, Mr. Mayor.
Seconder. Councillor Dickshay. All in favour? Carried. 9, organisational improvements. 9.1, property and regulatory system tenders. Director of Corporate and Organisational Development.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to recommend the award of a contract for the implementation and licensing of a property and regulatory system, replacing the legacy technology council currently has in place. So by way of background, council has been collaborating with Alpine and Indigo Shire councils to build a common digital platform since 2019, with a focus on modernising our ageing information technology systems to ensure that our staff are best supported to provide excellent customer service while meeting contemporary legislative requirements. One of the key platform requirements that we all have is for a common property and regulatory system encompassing property, rating, receipting, animal registration, infringements and local laws to replace the legacy systems currently in place at each council. Back in August 2021, the 3 councils issued a tender to assess the market for a suitable contemporary vendor. The tender was conducted in accordance with the requirements of council's procurement policy, and a vendor recommendation is presented to the council for consideration. And so, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation is as presented.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification on that report? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Anderson.
That the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dickshay. All in favour? Carried. Nine 9.2, performance reporting graphs. Have record of the corporate organisation development.
Thank Thank you, Mr Mayor. No particular comments to provide. As you recall, this is a standing report provided to council on a quarterly basis for information only. And so the recommendation is that the report be noted.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification on that report? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Happy to move that the report be noted.
Thank you, Councillor Scales. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wortman. Is anyone against? All those in favour? Carried. (9.3) Occupational Health and Safety. Again, our Director of Corporate Organisational Development.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So this report is also a standing report, a bi-monthly update to council on occupational health and safety activities throughout the organisation. In summary, COVID-19 has continued to be a substantial focus for the period, and officers have put in substantial effort to interpret and seek advice as directives have changed rapidly. We've adapted our COVID safe plans, kept required records regarding vaccinations, and we've put in place controls regarding vaccinated patrons at each of our facilities. We've made sure that all of active staff at each of our workplaces are fully vaccinated and that patrons entering facilities are also fully vaccinated. We have experienced some cases within the Shire and one case within our workplace as well. And we've reviewed and put in place business continuity measures and put in place preparations to support testing efforts across the Shire. And so the recommendation is that the report be noted.
Very much. Any questions or clarification on that report? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Dick Shay.
I'd like to move that the report be noted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. A seconder. Councillor Anderson. Anyone opposed? All those in favour? Carried. (9.4) Action sheet reports. Our CEO. Take this one as read. Beautiful. So any questions or clarification? Pretty straightforward. We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move the motion? Councillor Wortman.
I'd like to move that the report be noted.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Scales. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. (10) Bushfire Relief and Recovery. 10.1, our Bushfire Relief and Recovery quarterly update. The next report will be provided to council in February. 10.2, City of Stonington donation. Our Manager of Relief and Recovery.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of the report presented is to outline the proposed use of the funding donation from the City of Stonington and to acknowledge the support of their support to our recovery efforts in the Upper Murray community. In February 2020, the City of Stonington approved a generous donation of $50,000 to support our bushfire recovery efforts. And after discussions with the community, the Tintaldra Community Recovery Committee has requested that this donation be used to support the upgrade of the western entrance of the Tintaldra Pool. And the recommendations are as presented.
Thank you, Janelle. Any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Wortman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a comment. It's a wonderful donation from Stonington that our community work, our communities will really appreciate that. And as the recommendation says, we thank them very much.
Agree totally. We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Dick Shay.
I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Dick Shay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Anderson. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. Beautiful. 10.3 Farm Shed Exemption Policy. Director of Corporate and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is provided with the recommendation to extend the existing farm shed exemption policy that was put in place to provide permit exemptions and fee waivers for selected sheds post the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires. The extension is really a request from the community that's been received because a lot of people are struggling to rebuild within the timeframes that we originally expected due to COVID and the availability of building and materials and also contractors. The recommendation is as presented with the exception. I'd just like to draw your attention to a minor error in the first part of the recommendation, which is that the construction will commence prior to the 1st of January 2023 and be completed prior to the 1st of January 2024.
Any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Dick Shay.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just through you, are you able to give a brief explanation as to what Class 10A buildings are?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, in many ways, it's anything that's not classified as a Class 7 or a Class 8, but in general for the community, it will be usually buildings that are associated with a dwelling or associated with some kind of farm use that basically wouldn't be sort of extensive animal use or storage or anything like that. So most of the buildings will be carports and sheds that would have been associated close to a home.
Thank you. Any other questions or clarification? No. Thanks, Amanda. And of course, I should mention that Amanda's our Director of Community and Planning, not Corporate and Planning. So my apologies. Do we have a recommendation? Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Wortman.
Thank you. I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Wortman. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dick Shay. Do we have anyone opposed? No. All those in favour? Carried. Uh, 11.1 is a community service report. The report will be provided to Council in February 2022. The 12 is asset management. 12.1 asset management report. Calling our Director of Infrastructure and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a bi-monthly report on asset management activities throughout the Shire for the period of 1st of September to the 31st of October 2021. It's provided for information only and mainly provides an update on the status of Council's active capital works program. The recommendation is that the report be noted.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Wortman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on the dashboard, item 24, HVAC replacement $20. We just have explanation of that project, please.
Yep. So through you, Mr. Mayor. The HVAC replacement at the Toolangatta office is the air conditioning and heater system that's on the ceiling on the roof of the building. It's reaching an age, we've just had an assessment done, it's reaching an age where it needs to be renewed. So it's planned for replacement.
Thank you. One other.
Another one?
Item number 50, domestic wastewater management plan for the Fanga Sewer Works, negotiations underway with North East Water. It just says it's in the planning stage. Yes, I was wondering, at the planning stage, are we going to community consultation on that, or is it just purely at the planning stage?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's purely at the planning stage at the moment.
Yeah.
I will bring to the council a funding application that we're intending to put in to do a bit more work in this area.
Terrific. Thank you.
Anything else? Councillor Warman? Any other? Councillor Dichay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 46, the stop route with the land acquisition to be negotiated. Is there any where are we at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've had okay. So you'll be aware that we've been restructuring our department a little bit and taking on some extra resources.
Yes.
So one of the project managers that has recently started with us has been given has been asked to have that conversation with the landholder.
Yep.
That's where we're up to.
Thank you.
Any further questions, clarification? Councillor Walkman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Item 58, Lake Road and the Murray Highway. Pretty exciting project, and it looks like it's beginning early 2022.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we're moving forward with procurement on that with a number of different elements, including the traffic lights that we're going to put in. But yeah, so we're hoping that construction will start in February next year.
As we know, all know it's a very foggy area, and it is a dangerous issue. That's true. Thank you.
Just following on, Councillor, that's the
safety indicating about traffic turning at that intersection.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
If we have no further questions or clarification, we have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the report be noted.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Waltman. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. (12.2) Naming and registration of unnamed roads.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to request that we defer this item until the January 2022 council meeting to enable the staff to seek some further information.
Thank you. Do we have someone who would like to move a motion in regard to that? That we move on to the January meeting? Councillor Anderson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we postpone postpone item 12.2 to the next council meeting in January.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Scales. Anyone opposed to that? All in favour? Carried. Thank you. (12.3) Corrion Weybridge tender evaluation. Director of
infrastructure and environment.
Mayor. So this report provides information to support the assessment of tender submissions for the construction of the Weybridge at Corrion Sale Yards. Report demonstrates the tender and procurement processes that were undertaken for the procurement of a suitable contractor, and the recommendations are as presented.
Any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Waltman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. Look, I think it's an exciting project. This Orion and surrounding community. Look, it's got B-double capabilities. And look, it's we didn't have to acquire land going to fit it in on existing footprint. And swipe card access will be terrific for the community in the upper market.
Something that's been talked about for a long time, so to see it happening is great. Any further questions or clarification? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Waltman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendation as presented be adopted.
A seconder, Councillor Dickshay. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. Land use planning. 13.1 land use planning reports. Director of Community and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a monthly update on the planning permit activity for land use planning department. In the month of November 2021, council received 6 new permits and issued 6 permits to the value of $199,365. There are currently 22 active permits within the department currently. In addition to the traditional sort of statutory planning work, we also are still running the rebuild support service, and just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that of the 25 dwellings that were destroyed, 21 have applied for rebuild to date, 20 have been approved, 8 have commenced their rebuild, and 3 have completed their rebuild as well. The recommendations, the report is noted.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification on that report? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Dickshay.
Like to move that the report be noted.
Thanks. Councillor Dickshay, a seconder. Councillor Waltman. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. 14, environmental sustainability. 14.1, environmental sustainability report. Director of Infrastructure and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report provides a quarterly update to Council on environmental sustainability activities throughout the Shire, the period of the 31st of July to the 30th of November. Council's environmental sustainability activities are focused on finalising repairs to the Corryong landfill, some planning and implementation of waste management activities to meet obligations under the Environmental Protection Act 2017, which came into effect in 2020.
Thank you. Is there any questions or clarification on that report? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to move that the report be noted.
Thanks, Councillor Scales, a seconder. Councillor Anderson. Anyone opposed? All in favour? Carried. I still got it. 15, economic and tourism development. 15.1 is our economic development report. Director of Community and Planning. Is that right? No. That's right. Let's read a little bit further. The next report will be provided to Council in February. 16, councillor reports. None. Urgent business. None. Occupational health and safety. There are no new minutes to report. 20. 20.1, policies for review and adoption. There are no policies tabled for review this month. 22.2, complaints policy. Director of Corporate Organisational Development.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to present the complaints policy for Council's consideration and adoption. So as you recall, the Local Government Act 2020 requires councils to prepare a complaints policy which outlines how complaints made to the council are to be handled. A complaints policy has been drafted based on the Victorian Ombudsman's Good Practice Guide, Councils and Complaints Good Practice Guide 2nd edition. The proposed policy, you will recall, was approved in principle at the council meeting on the 24th of November 2021 and released for public exhibitions and submissions. The submission period is now closed and no submissions have been received. And so the recommendation is as presented. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have, is there any question or clarification? We have a recommendation. Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the complaints policy as presented be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Scales. A seconder. Councillor Dickshay. Anyone opposed? All those in favour? Carried. .3, the procurement policy. Again, I can call on our Director of Corporate and Organisational Development.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to present the procurement policy for Council's consideration and adoption. So the Local Government Act 2020 also requires councils to prepare a procurement policy which specifies the principles, processes and procedures applying in respect of the purchase of goods and services by the council, including for the carrying out of works. Compared to the prior Local Government Act, the Local Government Act 1989, there are some changes in relation to the required inclusions for a procurement policy. Council's existing procurement policy has been reviewed to align to the requirements of the new Act, and this reviewed version, as you will recall, was approved in principle at the council meeting on the 24th of November 2021 and subsequently released for public exhibitions and submissions. The submission period is now closed. No submissions were received. 4 minor changes are recommended since the policy was last approved in principle. That those changes being to incorporate a delegation of $25,000 for the new role of Deputy Director Infrastructure and Environment, to require that all contracts are signed by the Chief Executive Officer, to require that all contract variations are documented by the relevant officer and approved by the Chief Executive Officer, and to provide that contract variation amounts that are larger than the Chief Executive Officer's delegation need to be approved by the Council. And so the recommendation is as presented.
Any questions or clarification on that report? We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Scales.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Happy to move that the procurement policy as presented be adopted.
Thanks, Councillor Scales. A seconder. Councillor Dickshay. Anyone opposed? All those in favour? Carried. .4, Chief Executive Officer Employment and Remuneration Policy. Our Director of Corporate Organisational Development.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to present the proposed Chief Executive Officer Employment and Remuneration Policy for Council's consideration and adoption. So the Local Government Act 2020 requires councils to prepare a Chief Executive Officer Employment and Remuneration Policy, which outlines how their Chief Executive Officer is recruited and appointed and how their performance is to be monitored. A proposed Chief Executive Officer Employment and Remuneration Policy has been drafted based on current council practice and is presented to the council for consideration. And so the recommendation is as presented.
Do you have any questions or clarification on that report? Councillor Walkman.
Thank you, Mayor. The formation of this committee and the independent member, what are the timelines for that forming that committee?
I can take that question on through you, Mr Mayor. I can take that question on notice.
Thank you.
Any further questions or clarification? No. We have a recommendation. Would someone like to move a motion? Probably ask Councillor Walton, were you seeking an amendment for the
Yes,
in the
thanks.
report to look at putting an independent person in?
to review the performance. Yeah, I think there's some wording put together there, I'm sure.
Through you, Mr Mayor, what we could do is, council's practice in the past has been that an independent consultant has been appointed to facilitate the review of the CEO's performance. And whilst there is reference in the policy to the ability of the committee to appoint an external professional firm or person to assist with the function of the committee, it's not explicit in terms of the performance review that an independent contractor or consultant be appointed. So I could recommend that at item section 6 of the policy that you break the second dot point into 2 sections and have the first part of that say oversee the performance review of the CEO, which may include the appointment of an independent consultant to facilitate the review. And then the next dot point being make recommendations to the council on matters including those following dot points. So just to make that very clear that the committee does have the ability to appoint an independent consultant.
That sounds right, Councillor Walton.
Very happy, thank you.
So if we, someone's happy to move a recommendation with those changes in place. Councillor Walton.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move that the proposed chief executive officer employment and remuneration policy as written to be adopted with the amendment.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dick Shay. Anyone opposed? All those in favour? Carried. '21, sealing of documents. No documents for sealing. 22, confidential. 22.1, work cover process review. So if someone could move a motion that we move into confidential business. Councillor Scales.
Happy to move that we go to confidential, Mr. Mayor.
A seconder. Councillor Anderson. All in favour? Carried. So if there's no further business, that'll conclude our meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.